Hello my friends, welcome back to my channel. We're talking today about imposter syndrome, specifically within teaching yoga. Hi there, before we go any further with the video, I've just watched it back and I'm so annoyed that this weird little, I don't know what these are called, this is hanging out through the whole video. It's going to bother me every time I watch it back, but I hope you can forgive me. Imposter syndrome is something that I think many of us deal with, particularly if you self-identify as a bit of a perfectionist or a people pleaser. If you look up imposter syndrome and read a little bit about it, there are the 4 Ps of imposter syndrome, 2 of which are perfectionism and people pleasing. These are things that tend to feed into our desire to want to know it all, to want to be a complete expert on the subject. And so we can then feel like if we're coming short of that a little bit, that we are a complete fraud and that we're going to get found out somehow. So this is kind of what I wanted to talk about today, because I certainly get this feeling occasionally, even after several years of teaching yoga. But also when I am leading teacher training courses, this is inevitably every single time a conversation that we end up having. So I've come up with some tips. Hopefully you will find them helpful. My first tip is teach what you practice. A feeling of inauthenticity when you are leading a yoga class usually comes from a place of, I don't know everything there is to know about this subject, and yet I'm teaching it to other people, so doesn't that make me a fraud, an imposter? In the case of yoga, with it being such a vast subject, there's just endless wisdom that comes from yoga. There's thousands of years of teachings that have been passed down. So there is a huge amount to learn, and really something we have to kind of gradually get our heads around and try to accept is that we will never know it all when it comes to yoga. Even the real experts, you know, people who have lived and breathed a yoga practice for decades and decades and decades, there's still more that they can learn and probably do learn and want to learn and will continue to learn, because it is an endless journey. It's a lifelong practice, yoga. It's not something that we can go and do a course for 6 months and then suddenly we know it all. Unfortunately, it's just not. So when it comes to teaching classes and sharing your knowledge of yoga, you can only really share what you actually know to be true and what is coming from your own personal practice. For example, let's take an element of a yoga practice, the mudras. These are the hand gestures, things like Anjali mudra, chin mudra, yana mudra. If you start trying to incorporate these into the classes you're teaching and you're kind of throwing them in how you've seen other teachers use them, but then when you're asked about why they are part of a yoga practice, you're not really quite sure what the answer is because it's not something that you do really in your own practice. That, of course, is going to come across as inauthentic. It's going to feel inauthentic to you because that, in that example, is not something that you practice regularly. Whereas if you are someone who does a lot of practice with the sun salutation sequence, so if you're really familiar with those asanas, you know them inside out, you're going to be able to teach those really well, and that teaching will feel authentic because you know so much about them. Start with what you're already an expert on and build from there. My second tip, and I think this is good life advice in general, is practice saying, I don't know. Get used to it, get comfortable with letting people know that you're not sure. It's so tempting, particularly if you have that sort of perfectionist mindset or a little bit of a people pleaser. These are definitely things that I personally identify with, and I'm trying every day to be better at not letting those things win. When someone asks you a question and you're not totally sure on the answer, you might feel the urge, and I know I certainly do, my first gut response is to come up with an answer, to try and fabricate something or pick some element of that subject that I know about and try and turn it into a fully formed answer. And that's rarely helpful for anyone. It makes you feel like an imposter. It's probably going to make the other person doubt in how much they can trust you and your knowledge as well. So far better for everyone involved is to say, I don't actually know the answer to that right now, but I'm going to research it, I'll look into it, and I will get back to you because I'm really curious to find out more about that. That's a much better answer to give because it's honest. So you're practicing satya, truthfulness, in your answer, and your yoga student or whoever it is you're talking to in this instance is going to instantly have so much more respect and faith in your knowledge because you know yourself well enough to say, actually, I'm not totally sure on the answer of that right now. I think it's a really powerful thing to get a little bit better at doing, to get more comfortable with saying, I don't know. And my third tip is to let go of the yoga teacher persona and be yourself. And I wonder if that rings true with you, this yoga teacher persona. When you first start teaching classes, you maybe have this kind of idea in mind of what a yoga teacher looks like or sounds like or dresses like, how a yoga teacher presents themselves. And when you're stepping into a new role as a yoga teacher, it can feel very nerve-wracking, very daunting being in front of a group of people. So I think a natural coping mechanism for our brains in that instance is to put on a bit of a character. It's much easier to step up in front of a room of people as a persona, as a role, as a character, than it is to step into that position just being completely ourselves. So I think when you're first starting out, it is really hard to avoid doing this, but gradually over time, maybe you can start to unpick it. And this is something I certainly had to unpick after the first year or so of teaching. I realised that I was putting on a little bit of a yoga teacher voice, and my voice would then shift when I don't know, if I was halfway through teaching a sequence and then I completely forgot where we were going, I would drop into my normal voice and be like, can anyone remember what side we're on? Or, I'd ask a question or say something, and it really clanged in my ears, that sort of difference between the voice I was using when I was teaching the flow and then the voice that I was using when I was just asking someone a question. Little things like that. I know I've talked to a couple of other yoga teachers who remember when they first started teaching, changing the kind of clothes they wore just to look like a yoga teacher. So they put on maybe slightly more flowy robes or started to wear a mala bead necklace that they'd never thought about wearing before. The other part that feeds into feeling authentic and being yourself when you're teaching is to make sure that you are actually practicing what you preach outside of the class. Are you considering the yamas and the niyamas in your daily actions with other people and with yourself? Are you continuing your own personal journey with yoga? Are you still learning, continuing your own personal practice, but also going to classes, continuing your education, continuing to learn? Are you doing that? Because if you're not doing all of those things in your personal life and then you show up to a yoga class and you're kind of preaching all of the virtue and values of yoga, that's going to feel inauthentic as well. And that imposter syndrome voice will be huge if you know that that's the case. The best yoga teachers I have ever known and ever experienced classes with are the ones who have very clearly a very deep personal connection to their own practice. And it comes across in their teaching. Everything they're saying is coming kind of from the heart, and you can feel it. So if you take one thing away from this video, it is maintain your own practice. Make time for your own practice. And the imposter syndrome will slowly get a little bit, I'm not going to say it'll disappear completely, but it will certainly quieten down if you can do that. I'm really curious to know what you think about this. Do you have experience with imposter syndrome? Are you a yoga teacher too? And have you found any things that really help? Any things that make it feel worse? I would love to hear from you, and I'll do my best to reply to the comments. And if you haven't subscribed to this channel yet, I would love it if you would consider subscribing. We are getting very close now to 10,000 subscribers, which feels huge because this has just always been a bit of a little sideline thing for me, and to see this channel growing and getting more interest and more engagement is very, very exciting. It's lovely to get to know some of you through the comments. I do see them all. I respond to lots of them as well. I'll leave it there, but thank you again for watching, and I hope to see you in another video very soon.